Hello, how you doing today? Happy Sunday, happy Black History Month. Thanks to the Black Heritage Trail in New Hampshire for having me. My name is Sean Caliber, and I have a piece for you. Real quick, I won't take up too much of your time. Tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about where I'm at today. Can everyone hear me fine? Awesome, awesome. I got a little feedback, so. Thank you.
A lot of feedback.
You see, right, is there any way? There we go. Let me see, might be a volume thing. Hold on, let me see. One of these? Hello?
Yep, there you go.
Hello?
Yeah.
This one. There we go. I was going to move around for you, but I think I can do it in place. All right, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. All right, here we go. You see, they raised us as the inner city experiment. We were the project of the projects, where the monetary progress was always a slow process, and it was difficult to process. Thoughts of money making, because any money you're making in the end became money taken. You see, my childhood was mistaken. I lived a sheltered adolescence. I never knew poverty, but I was living under the essence. I see my mother stressing, but I never understood. Now as a man, I understand the position in which we stood. We had to get out the hood. And with this college education I was getting, finally, we're out of it. Good. But it ain't for good, right? But it ain't for good, because after graduation I was back in, with no financial backing to invest in paper stacking. See, the capital was lacking. It's hard to make the money stretch when the rent is due and the food is becoming less and less, living paycheck to paycheck, hoping the government can help relieve our stress. It's like, and that's my love-hate relationship with this country. Maybe it's time she get done. We elected Obama, and they retaliated with. It's funny how nothing and everything changed at the same time. Same people, same evil, amplify the same crimes. From police brutality, hating on someone else's sexuality, poor gun control leading to fatalities, mental health being ignored all too casually. We're living in hell, a tragedy. Too much hate, overpowering love. But if we stand together, nobody's overpowering us. But it's hard to realize the truth being hidden by real lies. They're trying to play us in front of our real eyes. So what's the methodology to a solution? In the form of retribution. See, we in need of a revolution, but we're stuck on the illusion that everyone is powerless to crush an oppression. So we gotta show them what power is. Thank you. My name is Sean Caliber.
On any of the platforms. Sean Caliber. Nice.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Laura. I'm the Assistant Director here at Portsmouth Public Library. We are thrilled at the library to have another year of partnership with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire in hosting the Tea Talks. I'm just going to tell you a couple of practical things. Number one, about the library, you can find a calendar of all of our upcoming events outside in the hallway. You may be interested in a lecture we're holding on March 1st, Discovering Greenland. Registration is encouraged. You can do that here or on our website. And if you need the restroom, you can head right out this door around the corner to the left. If you should need an emergency exit, please note the door where you came in is a great spot, and then also we have an emergency exit in that corner and in this corner, so it's safe to split up. Do not go out that door because you'll get stuck in the kids' books. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to turn it back over to Jerry Ann.
Thank you so much to the library for really supporting us here year after year and giving us a space to gather, to have conversations, especially around topics that are timely and needed. So thank you to our folks here at the library. I'm just going to start off with a little thing before I pass it over to our host. When we chose this theme a year ago, we could not have imagined how it would meet this moment. We did not know how urgent it would feel or how necessary. But perhaps that is the nature of the spoken word. It arrives when it is most needed. For students of religion, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word had power. God spoke the words into being, let there be light, and there was light. Creation itself was an act of oratory. America too began with a voice. The Declaration of Independence did not whisper. It declared. It spoke an idea into existence, an idea rooted in words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whether those words were honored or betrayed is for another series. But who would have thought that this grand experiment called democracy would find itself here? Violently detaining protesters, suppressing the press, arresting journalists, and for us witnessing the death of innocent citizens in the name of order. These are not abstract concerns. They are moral alarms. These times demand that we reflect deeply on the kind of people we want to be. They require us to examine our personal beliefs about intrinsic human rights and fundamental human principles. For instance, respect for life, compassion and empathy, justice and fairness, and the core American ideals of freedom and liberty for all. Over the next 4 weeks, we will explore together oratory, not simply as speech, but as an act form and a force, as a storytelling mechanism to understanding each other. We'll examine how African American oratory functioned as both a survival strategy and a weapon of resistance, how speech affirmed our dignity. We'll explore how the pulpit evolved into both a sanctuary and a platform for liberation. We will lift up the voices of Black women whose oratory fueled movements and channeled power. And we will look at how this tradition is changing today through poetry, performances, and protest. And in moments like this, when democracy feels fragile, when truth is contested, when silence is encouraged, the tradition of American oratory reminds us that speech is not merely a right, it is a responsibility. This series is an invitation to listen deeply, to reflect honestly, to have deep conversation, to ask ourselves how we will use our own voice in this moment. Because history is not only written by those in power, it is spoken again and again by those courageous enough to use their voice. Welcome to Echoes of Power.
Recording in progress.
So before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors. They're listed in our program, and we will honor them again at the end. Without their ability to help us, we wouldn't be able to bring our speakers that we bring and introduce ourselves to new thoughts and ideas, and to engage all of us in conversation. And without much ado, I'm going to pass it on over to our host, Dr. Dottie Morris, to take it off so we can start the work that we have ahead. Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome? Yes. Welcome. As I was thinking about hosting such an amazing and esteemed person here today, Dr. Timothy Adkins-Jones. I thought of some of the ways that Black oration is so essential. From the start, for a lot of us, we started in the church or in the church, being small children and being encouraged to speak. Even if you only had one line, and you were mouthing the line as your parents were telling you, and everybody was encouraging you, baby, take your time. Come on now, you got it. And that encouragement led to us finding our voices at a very young age and the responsibility to use that voice in those moments. Black oration, in my opinion, is meant to touch you deeply, move you to emotional catharsis, and inspire you to action. Black oration relies on audience participation because it is deeply rooted in the call-response culture. The speaker dares, encourages, and even pushes the audience to co-create the experience by engaging with the speaker to achieve the goal and purpose of the gathering. The audience is not a passive recipient. Do you need me to say that again? I don't think they hear it. I think I would repeat it. The speaker dares, encourages, and even pushes the audience to co-create the experience by engaging with the speaker to engage the goal and purpose of the gathering. The audience is not a passive recipient of the information where the speaker is the sole expert, but an active co-investor to achieve the productive outcome because of the interaction. So, the speaker can be seen as a conversation facilitator as opposed to just a speaker. So the audience is on stage as much as the speaker. In the end, every doubt you know that when you leave this place, you're energized, revived, and prepared to leave this space because of the amazing connections you made among each other who were present, with those who came before us, and connecting with those who are to come. There's an understanding that what we say really does matter, and that the words alone are not enough, but is an essential part of a move to be in the future, move towards the future. Also, I want you to remember, Black oration is a place where you join with others when you are feeling, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, sick and tired of being sick and tired. Because in this interrelationship you're having, it allows you to connect, support, and most of all, validate each other's experience. With Black oration, the speech is meant to touch and move you emotionally. It may cause you to feel uneasy. It may confront your worldview, and it will transform you in ways that you didn't even know was possible. Black oration is about keeping it real, y'all. It's about telling the truth to power and challenging the status quo while offering an alternative narrative about reality, possibility, and solution deeply rooted in love, compassion, and justice. So I just want to leave you with some words from the 1950s by Dr. Albert Johnson, who was a physician in Keene, New Hampshire. And he was passing at the time. And he was asked to speak before the NAACP, I think in Baltimore, in 1950. And these were his words, because they had him there because they wanted him to talk about the book and the film Lost Boundaries that was done in 1949. So it's very interesting. So he said, and you tell me if this is still true now, the U.S. stands branded before the entire world as a hypocrite because of the racial equality it preaches and the arrogant bigotry white racial superiority is practiced. The enemies of America are quick to exploit this virtual weakness And it is easy to convince most of the world, which is predominantly colored, by our own definition, that if we are hypocrites in regard to this question, we are hypocrites in our actions. This was in the 1950s of a person living in Keene, New Hampshire. So let's get ready to go on a wonderful journey of Black oration, a wonderful journey of connecting with one another, but another journey of feeling what the speakers have to say. Now remember, this is not a passive experience. I'm going to say it again, this is not a passive experience. So I would like to introduce, as you know, our speaker for the day, and we will engage. I'll just tell you a little bit about how Timothy has a few things to say, and then we will talk, and then we'll open it up. Okay? All right, I'll turn it over.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored by the invitation. I'm grateful for the hospitality that allowed it to happen. And certainly grateful for the wonderful introduction, and indeed for our opening from Brother Sean as well. Thank you for that. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to give my opening remarks here from my chair, because if I stand up, I might go too long. I'll be fine. I've been pastoring for 20 years, and I've been a couple of months removed from a pulpit every Sunday, so I'm a little afraid that on a Sunday I stand behind and I might be there too long. So for all of our sake and for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to remain here. But a more perfect union, the legacy of African American speechmaking. You know, Black speechmaking did not begin here. Here in either New Hampshire nor America. Black speechmaking begins in Africa. And despite the horrors of the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, Black speechmaking begins on the continent. If you want to understand Black speechmaking even here, you have to go back across the waters. For foundational to Black rhetoric is the concept of nomo, the belief that the spoken word is a life force capable of generating and sustaining reality. The idea that the world can change because of the power of our word. This tradition traces itself back through speech makers, the griots of the day, a professional class of verbal artists who served as historians, genealogists, poets, advisors, had priestly functions in some ways, and were storytellers and wordsmiths, story carriers really, speaking on behalf of the community with a power that comes from beyond them. A recognition that there was something more. So one might say then that here in New Hampshire, when Frederick Douglass stood and spoke against the evils of slavery, correcting the reports that he was a fugitive from slavery, and clarifying that he was a fugitive slave, for he wanted it to be clear that he was a fugitive slave, that is, a fugitive still in slavery. And he wanted to be clear that it was the religion of those around him that allowed such a thing to happen. When Douglass said that here in New Hampshire, he was speaking for himself, but he was also, like a good griot, speaking on behalf of the people holding the story of so many, speaking truth to power in eloquence, but for survival. But Douglass understood the speech could unmake a world built on silence and submission. And that understanding is and has been pervasive through our speech history here. When Sojourner Truth arose to speak, she did not ask permission from institutions that had never imagined her to be an authority. Her voice carried power, and though she didn't say, "Ain't I a woman?" as she is most often remembered to have said, she helped the nation wrestle with bankrupt theology and ethics and a lack of moral clarity. Her words were, in and of themselves, interruption to what was, insisting that truth be spoken where it was most inconvenient. Black speech-making evolved. It did more than persuade. It explained. W.B. Du Bois showed us that speech could hold authority, a bit of righteous arrogance, and analysis at the same time. His words named the contradictions of the American experiment and the double consciousness that Black folks still have to face and deal with even today. Then came voices that refused to soften the message at all. Malcolm X spoke with urgency sharpened by delay and betrayal. His speech did not seek comfort, it sought awakening. He reminded us that whether through colloquialisms like chickens coming home to roost or memorable phrases like by any means necessary, that when justice is postponed long enough, speech itself becomes a form of self-defense. But as we think across this grand tradition, we see that what unites these figures in the practice of Black speechmaking is not simply power, for that's part of it. It is the beautiful balance of style and substance. Black speechmaking is a site of power, poetry, creativity, and critique. Black speech has always been accused of being too much, too emotional, too loud, too rhythmic, too performative, as if that is who we are and all that we are. There's so much more gathered in what we do. Black speech has a way, whether it is in sermons or political speeches, street protests, or TikToks, or Instagram lives, Black speech refuses the false choice between sounding good and saying something good. The style is not decoration, it is part of the meaning itself. And as Dr. Dottie said, and crucially, Black speech is almost never imagined as a solo act. Black speechmaking is crafted, not just performed, but crafted with the audience in mind. An audience expected to listen and to respond, and to affirm, to correct, and to carry the word forward. If I could veer into my specialty homiletics just for a second, there was a move in the 70s called the New Homiletic, where across homiletics they said, now we're going to actually start paying attention to the audience and thinking about the audience as we create and craft these sermons. No longer are we just going to have 3 points in a poem and stand up like a lecture, but we're going to tell stories. We're going to say these things with a kind of rhythm, and they called it the New Homiletic. And indeed, one of my mentors wrote an article, he said, what's so new about the New Homiletic when Black folk have been doing this for as long as we have? Whether it's in call and response, or a quieter nod, or hum, a shared intake of breath, the speech is never complete without the people. Meaning is constructed together, shaped by shared memory and shared stakes. Even one of the most celebrated examples of American oratory, global oratory, let alone Black oratory, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, is often misremembered as a solitary moment of genius rather than what it actually was, a communal construction. From Hall's prayer, the crowd's responses, Mahalia Jackson's call from behind him, and the improvisation that followed, these were not interruptions to the speech, they were part of how the speech came to be. That moment reminds us that in Black oratory, it does not simply happen in front of a community, it happens with one. And if there's time later, I'd love for us to return to that moment and think more carefully about what it teaches us about how Black speech actually works. That tradition is not behind us, it's carried on through the years. Baldwin helped this nation reckon with her contradictions. Barbara Jordan helped us parse through our own Constitution on a national stage. Jesse Jackson brought more of the rhythms of the pulpit to the ballot box to help us keep hope alive. Audre Lorde gave us language about the master's tools being inadequate to take down the master's house. And then Cornel West told us about prophetic fire, and Bell Hooks brought Black speech into academic and popular spaces without surrendering its moral urgency. And in the 2000s, President Barack Obama's oratory drew deeply from Black preaching traditions, even as it navigated the expectations of presidential decorum, delivering the A More Perfect Union speech, the speech that gave us the title for today's talk, and one, if I'm honest, makes me cringe every single time I watch it, even as I recognize how instrumental it was in his presidential victory. And we can talk a bit more about that too. And in the 2010s, Ta-Nehisi Coates and Brittany Cooper and others exemplified a generation speaking across books and stages and classrooms and digital platforms, refusing neutrality, insisting that Black speech remain most powerful when it tells its truth plainly, even at the cost of comfort. Amanda Gorman, William Barber, on and on and on. I can run the list and run the roll of recognition that language can still bend history, and that across decades, genders, and platforms, Black speech remains recognizable, not because it sounds the same, but because it is doing the same work. It continues to adapt, moving through sanctuaries and sidewalks, classrooms and courtrooms and screens and phones, but its purpose remains the same: to name reality, to gather a people, and to insist that justice must be spoken aloud before it can ever be practiced. I'm excited to talk more to reading about all preacher, don't tell me that.
Wow, that was amazing. I took a lot of notes, one of the first things that I think about is people always say, "What's in a word?" It's only a word, and I think, how do you answer those people when they say it's only a word? Why don't you all just get over it?
Oh, that word.
That word. and many others, but
Sure.
yeah.
Well, you know, I think in relationship to that word and to many others, it boils down to agency, and it boils down to the dignity of a community being able to define language for itself. And so I think the fact that there's language, I borrow this from Ta-Nehisi Coates, but he uses the metaphor that, you know, I don't want anybody else calling my wife sweetheart the way that I call my wife sweetheart. I mean, that's our word, and that's a word that I would refer to her. And so there are some things that can happen in and amongst community, and that signify certain things in and amongst community. And the beautiful thing about the Black community otherwise is there is disagreement and covenant that has to be created even amongst ourselves, right? And so there's no mono thought around a lot of language, but language is developed in community and becomes powerful as such. And I think that one of the amazing things about Black speech making is that it has found a way to take language, maybe not that word, but to take language that is in-house and use it in broader publics to great effect, such that folk can understand, even if they aren't in, you know, as a Southerner, I think about a phrase like bless her heart. A phrase that can mean about 55 different things. But we're able to sort of use that in other spaces as a way to communicate, sometimes to communicate to folk in the room, sometimes to communicate and kind of signify things on a broader level as well. So I think it ultimately boils down to agency and to community, to how we define and then use certain words. So,
right. Thank you. And it sounds like speech making, as you presented it, is a form of improvisation too, because you have to be able to respond. So, you know, as I was hearing you speak, you know, I could tell that there were some things that were written, then I could tell that you were, is that something that you feel like is critical to the Black oration that might be different from other folks who do oration?
Absolutely, because, you know, it brings us to sort of this thin line between the theological aspects of this conversation and the cultural aspect. But the thing about Black culture, there's a very thin line, if a line at all, between the sacred and the secular anyway.
Yeah.
So the understanding of a kind of spirit-led moment, as it were, that would take you beyond the notes or where you were at any given point and create a kind of jazz moment to be able to riff. But also because of the audience, right? And you don't know when you're speaking how the audience is going to respond until the audience responds. And so if you are so tied to what you have as a manuscript, it won't necessarily fit the space, because the space and the people are going to tell you, whether it be through laughs or difficult looks or amens or hallelujahs or silence or any other thing, are going to kind of guide you which way to go. And it's interesting that even in, and I'm so glad that you all love me enough to have me come before Bishop Curry. So I don't want to step on Bishop Curry at all, but when you think about call and response in like a Black preaching environment, for example, the ways that the crowd can say one word, and in one word, and it can mean so many different things. I had a deacon in my church who would say, take your time, preacher. And that could mean 50 things. It could mean you're saying something that we need to hear. It could mean, I don't know about this one, slow down. It could mean literally you're talking too fast. It could mean I really love that, and then on and on and on, right? But it's a dance, right? It's a kind of, and so one of the things that I think that often lifts us up, though, is the sense that there isn't the same kind of level of preparation and study and effort that's put into the work on the front end. There's a sense that the Spirit gives it to me in the moment, or the people talk to me in the moment, or I improv in the moment. But I think my musicians here would agree with me. This improvisation takes some even greater practice, right? You have to know more so that you can come to it and sort of pull it out in the moment. And so in light of the times that we're living in right now, we need to know more, right? We need to know as much as possible so that we have all the tools necessary when things arise, and we'll be able to jump in and to bring the words necessary for that moment. But it only happens if you indeed put yourself in a position to be prepared, or as some folk would say, you got to stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Ooh, just listen all day. I know that you talk some about how it's words of power, and speech offering is power in relationship to the audience. But this whole idea of freedom, I felt that too. That sometimes the opportunity to give a speech or hear, receive, or engage with the speaker is a form of freedom. And I just wanted to make sure I understood. Or did I make that up?
No, I think that's absolutely true. And again, I think it's often defined by community. So I thought you did. I mean, it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I appreciated, right, the words even up front to say this is a communal endeavor, right, which is, again, resonates in church. They talk to the preacher. And to give people the space, because I've learned in being in a variety of different settings that sometimes it does boil down to different understandings of what freedom looks like, right? So that I don't want to say anything. I don't want to interrupt out of respect, right? Out of love, out of a sort of care for the moment. When instead you say, no, we are in this together. To me, it's about modeling what communal power looks like. And if in fact the word is as powerful as we say it, I still believe it is, then we have to model that kind of communal ethic even in the sort of speech act, right? Even in the speech moment, so that power can be recognized as, so that everybody can be a part of it. Lest you leave a wonderful event and someone said a good word, but then you don't know anything with the word on the other end. I would posit that if people feel a part of the word, then they're more likely to then go out and to do something with that word, theological or otherwise.
Yeah. I know when we met, we talked about sometimes, speech is like attending a pep rally.
Yeah.
And so I think that the last thing you said about when you leave, you feel like you could do something because you were part of the shaping of it. Are there any other words of advice you could give us in terms of that?
To get people to then do something with it on the back end?
Yes.
Oh, that I had the answer. Well, I think there's a very practical answer to that, and I would say is that when we set up opportunities for speech, the more that we can have directly tied to action at that place, at that moment, the greater likelihood that folks will get involved, because there is in fact a kind of energy to what's happening. And then you do get pumped, right? You get excited about what's happening. That's why you have pep rallies before the game, right? So you take the energy from the pep rally into the game, and then theoretically you perform better. And so part of it is a mind shift from thinking about the speech act as the event, but instead to thinking about it as the pre-event. And then the actual event is what happens when we take the word and the power and the energy of the community that's formed in the speech moment and then take that out. I was mentioning March on Washington a few moments ago, and I think that was an amazing example of an incredibly well organized event, right? Obviously, it had to be in order for it to happen. But that we talk about some of the speeches, but also afterwards, they were very clear. This is what you take home to do, right? When you get back to your local community, your constituencies, this is how, and you can enact some of the things that you have heard said today, right? And they have been excited. So I think the more that we can tie events to practical action, the greater likelihood that folks actually be involved. And one of the gifts that we have in 2026 is our ability to stay networked and to stay connected, right? So in addition to having practical means of action, also having ways to stay connected, to communicate, and to continue to engage, right? To have this amazing program over the course of these next 4 weeks, but also to say, and here's how you stay connected, right, to the trail. Here's how you continue to be a part of this journey that we're trying to take everybody on, and then we can collectively kind of move our way down the path together.
I guess we can move to see if there are any questions, or You have any other small piece that you didn't say that you wanted to say?
Oh, yeah, well, sure. Let me tell the full March on Washington story then. Some may not know. A couple things. One, I Have a Dream as a rhetorical refrain didn't come from King, at least not originally. It's from Dr. Cynthia Hall, who was attached to my current employer, Boston University, indeed. And she was an amazing preacher, pastor, activist. But when she was a teenager, she was praying a prayer at a prayer gathering, and King was the preacher for that event. And in her prayer, she used the refrain, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. And King heard that and then incorporated it, which I should say is very much a part of the Black preaching tradition. We do that. You hear something, you take it, remix. King also said that he never really wanted to follow Dr. Hall because of how amazing a preacher she was, and actually attributed that to her as well. So that became part of his lexicon. It's the kind of thing that he would use as he was traveling about. So the improvisation that we were talking about, it would come up in speeches and in sermons, etc. Now, fast forward to the march, as the stories are told, and things get a bit apocryphal over time, but it's been told in enough places that I believe it. That King didn't work on his speech much long in advance. The night before, he was pulling things together, and the next time you go back and watch the speech, to me at least, it seems like a very clear moment. When he begins, it's actually not the most rousing speech. I think we remember that last 45 seconds, perhaps. But the beginning of it is, frankly, a little dry, to be honest, just from a pure speech perspective. And then as the story is told, as Dr. King is going, it said that Mahalia Jackson from the back says, tell him about the dream, Martin. And it's a kind of trigger for Dr. King to go back to one of his tried and true staples, right? It was this notion of the dream, and then he rises into that bit of oratory that I think is at the pinnacle of speech making in general. But again, it was a communal construction. I would say it was the combination of the way the crowd was reacting or not. It was this I Have a Dream that he picked up from Cynthia Hall. It was the encouragement from Mahalia and others in the back, right? They were sort of spurring him on more directly. All of that came together to create this sort of craft this moment. What else did I mention? Oh, I mentioned a More Perfect Union speech. So let me say this too, because somebody probably asked about it since I nodded to it. I actually taught this speech in class this week, so it's very fresh in my mind. And my issues with this, and again, I'm certainly glad to engage more, is that President Obama had to walk a very, very, very tight rope. Recognize that and respect it, and don't fault him for it, frankly. But in that speech, he really throws Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright under the bus, who is one of the greatest preachers we've had and we've known. And I say that because he throws Dr. Wright under the bus, but he also lets America intellectually off the hook. And so, if you remember that controversy, I know it's a few years now, but as President Obama was running, people went back through all of Dr. Wright's sermons and found the most, theoretically, I guess, inflammatory statements that they could find, including this one clip where at the end of the sermon, he says, no, not God bless America, God damn America, because of such and such and what they did. So that what was on repeat over and over is God damn America, God damn America, God damn America. And as you might imagine, folk are really upset about that. And so then candidate Obama had to denounce this over and over. He said, no, that's not me, I know I'm with the church, et cetera, et cetera. And so it leads to this speech, this More Perfect Union speech in Philadelphia, where he very eloquently and beautifully sort of describes his notion of hope in the American experiment. He walks a line of saying that he's still connected to Trinity, that was his church, that Dr. Wright led him to faith in many ways, but then he denounces all the inflammatory rhetoric. And it sort of climaxes in some ways by saying, I can no more throw away Dr. Wright, then I can throw away my grandmother, because in the speech he tells a story of how his grandmother, who was white, had some instances where she said that black men had scared her, and it says some racist things, and essentially saying, I still love her even though she was wrong, and I still love Dr. Wright even though he was wrong. The problem with that is that Dr. Wright wasn't wrong. And I don't just mean that I agree with him politically, which personally I do, but in the speech itself, by the time you actually get to Goddamn America, he's made the case for Goddamn America, at least theologically speaking, which is to say, as a political entity, the empire, or the way that America has worked as an empire, needs to be damned, right? Because in that sermon he says, governments change, governments lie, governments fail, but God doesn't change, God doesn't lie, and God doesn't fail, and gives myriads of examples, right, of how that's the case. Also in that speech, he talks about, in the government's change part, he talks about progress that America has made, right? That America isn't what it once was. But the way that President Obama characterized it in the speech is essentially to say that the whole sermon was wrong, was bad, and I distance myself from it. So again, I recognize it, I understand it, I know why he had to do it. He couldn't have been elected if he didn't do it, so you have to make ethical choices. But I also say this as one who was literally present when then Senator Obama called Dr. Wright to ask him to pray for him as he was making the decision to run for president, right? Just happened to be in Amherst, not too far from here, where I went to undergrad. It was, Dr. Wright was speaking at Amherst with one of my mentors, Paul Sorrentino, and while we were there, about to drop Dr. Wright off after the event that night, that is literally when then candidate Obama called his pastor to ask him to pray for him as he moves into this election. So when I watch the speech, it upsets me, right? But it also just, it reminds me of Du Bois. It reminds me of, all of the decisions and things that have had to be made over the years, especially as it relates back to speech making, right? And the choices that Black people have had to make about just how fiery, how free they want to be in any given moment because of the consequences thereof, right? And what allows folk to really speak with freedom, right? Which leads me to the last thing I want to say. I told you about Baptist preaching.
No, I'm walking with you.
That, one of the things that has allowed Black clergy folk to be so free and for King and others is because the consequences were less, right? So even today, but certainly back in the day, getting arrested, for example, was in some ways a badge of honor in some churches, right? Your salary was not going to be cut off if you got arrested protesting and fighting for the rights of those in your community, right? If you are a clergy person. Whereas if you had a job, any other kind of job, and you're missing work, et cetera, you're in a different kind of situation, right? So when you are sort of your community in a particular kind of way, it allows for a different kind of freedom in speech and in action.
And I just have one more thing, because you really did speak to the whole idea of how important context is.
Yes.
And if you start at point A, it means one thing than if you start at point B or C. So I appreciate that. And I think that because we live in this instant soundbite world, that's a critical piece to put in there, is that if we don't understand the context of where he's stating, including Malcolm X's comment of by any means necessary, if there's a whole paragraph leading to that, but you only hear that quote. So I guess I don't know if you have any thoughts about how we can impress upon people that before we react, we investigate to get the whole context.
Oh my goodness, that's such a,
I'm sorry.
No, it's such a pet peeve of mine. I don't, I think, sound bites do what they're supposed to do from a marketing standpoint, attention grabbing standpoint, but absolutely agree, you can't understand, biblically I would always say you can't understand the content if you don't understand the context, right? So if you don't know what's happening and how things are parts of larger either pieces of oratory or just the communities that come out of, you miss it. The challenge is, not only do we live in this soundbite culture, but we also live in a much less attention span society as well. I mean, it's okay. I know y'all checked your phones 30 times since we started. So I'm not offended, right? But I mean, that's the world we live in now. So it's part of it is on the packager of the rhetoric to speak in ways that grab attention and to sort of provide context in situ. That is, to be able to explain context while you're doing a thing, right? Because we don't live in times now where folk will necessarily take the time to go back. In the written word and the kind of visual word, we'll see there are all kinds of ways to footnote, to provide links, and little sort of pop-up bubbles and sorts of things. But in the spoken word, it's harder to do. And so you have to sort of trust the community, trust your work, and to try to do as much as you're speaking, to speak right back against it. Yeah, that's very good.
Thank you. Ooh. So I think Quincy, will tell us a little bit how the Q&A will work. Quincy?
Pass. Just making sure this microphone's working.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's good when I have feedback. Also, way to be ahead of the schedule. It's good stuff.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, great. All right, so we're going to move into the community dialogue where you all can ask questions. I'll be running around with a microphone. There's also going to be questions coming from folks watching online as well. Some things to keep in mind are up there, but I'm just going to read through them as well. Be respectful and use respectful language. Please use the microphone, which I will give to you. And then listen generously to learn. Please don't interrupt. Share airtime. Be mindful that good intentions can still have harmful impacts. And then just honor confidentiality. The stories that happen here, they stay, but the learning leaves. Any questions about any of these things? Great. Does anyone have would like to kick it off? Fantastic. I don't have to go far.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful speech. In looking at the current administration and their insistence on erasing Black history, not just because of skin color and differences, but now I realize because of the power of the Black oratory. They see that. Oh, I don't know. I imagine they do. So my question is, would you care to comment on who in 2026 you see as the important orators?
We just heard one.
Check is in the mail. Wow, that is a question. I mean, I think about folk that I reach out to. I mean, there's so many, but I think about folk that I reach out to and sort of try to model myself, or listen to model myself in some ways. So I think of ironically, I was mentioning Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who was the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, actually Dr. Wright's old church, who I think is, he's been amazing for a long time, but he's actually started something recently that I think is awesome both in content and form, which is one of the ways I pay attention to him. He, in addition, preaches every week like most pastors, but also he does this thing every week, he calls it 5 Good Minutes. And it is a kind of, like a sort of historical moment, giving context to the moment, either offering authors to read or kind of breaking down some things that are going on in the world. But he packages it in this sort of five good moments, because he recognizes, like so many of us, that folk aren't going to listen much longer than 5 minutes. So he says, listen, if I can get you for 5 good minutes, right? Watch this thing, and then listen to it. I'm trying to think in the sort of more slightly more political realm, if I can move away. I'm so engulfed in theologians and ethicists, I can name those for days. Otis Moss III. His father, Otis Moss Jr., was actually a contemporary of Dr. King's. I'm gonna take the opportunity to shout out my missus, Reverend Dr. Amy Victoria Adkins-Jones. She has a book that's come out just recently called Immaculate Misconceptions, Black Mariology. And I think it's very important for theology writ large. And I'm excited about the momentum that is coming. But it's a book that joins a long tradition of books that sort of center and sort of recognize essentially the divinity, not divinity, the dignity and the humanity of Black people, Black women in particular, mothers, mothering, but that's another sort of voice both on the page and in the spoken word that I think will be necessary. And there are a whole host of folk as well that are out there that are continuing to do great work. We're continuing to see protests and activists. I mentioned Reverend Barber in my opening remarks, but again, another preacher that is sort of existing very publicly in that sort of religio-political space that is speaking truth. But one of the reasons I'm having a hard time grabbing folk is because the sort of form of proclamation has changed so much. Right? I'm having a harder time sort of pointing you towards I can name so many great preachers and so many great folk who find themselves giving great speeches, but I think the speeches just don't sit in the public sphere the same way. Like they're more like people on Instagram that are coming to mind. Like I want to send you to accounts of people that are doing this sort of great work that while you're doom scrolling and in between looking at cats and NBA clips, there are folk that are putting up stuff that's powerful work. So I think that speaks to the times as well. Yeah, thank you for that question. The trumpets shall sound.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. My question is that, for better or worse, a lot of people are asking themselves now, though, best time would have been a while ago, but the second best time is right now. How do we use our voices and how do we claim our voices? And I'm wondering if you could either speak to your own experience with that or what we can learn from this tradition as more and more people want to speak truth to power.
So I think that one of the things that I've been digging into research in thinking about my second work, and that is, so I think we have to speak more proactively than reactively. And it's hard, that's a really hard thing to say when there's so much to react to. I mean, there have been horrible things. I mean, the bar has been dropped. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But my encouragement would be, though, that even in the midst of everything, right, every account, every tragedy that happens on a daily basis, to still take the time to use our voices collectively to organize proactively for what we want to see happen instead of just reacting against what has happened. And one of the big challenges with that is that it requires a different kind of sacrifice, right? That in some ways you have to sacrifice the immediacy of right now to take a step back to plan for what we would hope would be a better future, right? This is one of the things that I think folk often get wrong, or that folk often miss about prophecy, at least biblically speaking. That it was not simply a matter of calling out the evils, right? That was part of it. But really more than that, the prophetic imagination is to say, this is what the world should be, right? That if we did it the way God wanted it, this is what the world would be. So I think the most powerful political speech, activist speech, is similar. Like, this is the world we want, right? This is what we imagine. So let us speak to that, organize to that, so that we can see this world instead of simply being against the bad that exists. There is a lot of bad, right? And it is localized in an administration and those related to said administration in a way that can capture our attention and gaze and our energy and our effort, and it gets directed at an individual, right? This is an individual entity, as opposed to the system that allowed this entity to exist in the first place. And so to me, that's speaking truth to power in these days, is to speaking to the broader picture, to speaking to what's really going on, and to not succumb to the dangers of celebrity, right? Celebrity has a way both of infiltrating our movements, but also just occupying our time. You know, we've seen that recently in the ways that there can be energy that comes around. Who was my late night host that was going to be off the air? Jimmy Kimmel, right? So, oh, Jimmy Kimmel. When there were, 15 causes and peoples and individuals that should have garnered that kind of attention well before, right? We see it just a couple of days ago with Don Lemon. Amen, right? Freedom of press is very important. There were 3 other black journalists, right? Georgia Ford and others, right? That also were arrested because they were doing their job at a church, right? At the same time, right? So there's a way that celebrity grabs our attention, so we have to use our words for everyone else, right? For Alex Preddy was a tragedy. Renee Good was absolutely a tragedy, but so was Kevin Porter, right? Which is, again, is a name that we don't know, right? So I think part of our task is to raise our voices around those that don't get the kind of attention that others would and do.
We have 2 questions in the chat.
Coming in hot off the chat. Can everyone hear me well?
Oh, yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. As it relates to confirming the context and in the world of AI, what is the best way to decipher which media resources to believe when so many are being regulated?
Ooh, that's a 5th week in the tea talk, I think. So a couple of different questions here. As it relates to AI, I'm going to park that for a second, though that is certainly worthy of conversation. But I think as it relates to the way that media and speech by association is biased, I think it's what it always has been: follow the money. Right? Follow who is behind what, who is funding what, and to the extent that you can be aware of that, recognize that. And I'll say this one is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but also the outlets that are being called bad by certain folk, I'm gonna turn to them once. That might say something about their authenticity or lack of connection to the empire as well. But yeah, follow the money. See where the sources that are behind things. And also, it's so amazing to me the way that this becomes similar to the way that I think biblical interpretation should happen too. And that is to say that we don't do this alone either, right? I think part of it is a matter of discerning, even, it's sad that we're here, but discerning what's happening in the world in community as well, to say, hey, Dr. Dottie, I heard this thing. Have you heard this thing? And you might say, well, I talked to somebody that's there, and this is what, and then it becomes this kind of joint meaning making and joint knowledge discovery, and you are less apt to succumb to the biases of an individual organization or the fallacies of an individual organization as well.
Next question.
Yeah, you can just do the other one.
All right, next question. If Black oratory depends on audience participation, what do you think of people who just sit back and listen? What's the role of introverts?
It's a great question. So I'll answer it with a quick story. So for about 2 years, I served a church in Chicopee, Mass. And the church at the time was probably, when I got there, was probably about 95% white. And I was coming in as an associate pastor probably because they're surrounded by a community that was probably about 95% people of color. So they wanted to be, to be able to speak to neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. So once I found myself in a position of preaching regularly, I asked the same question almost every day. Like, hey, no one can talk back to me. What are we going to do? Maybe they don't like it. But then what I found is that after the sermon was over, folk would come and they would say, Pastor Jones, when you said such and such, I really like that. Or can you say more about X? And so it was clear that there was an attention that was happening. So it forced me to say, well, hold on, what's going on? So then I began to pay a bit more attention and to look for things that I didn't see otherwise. And so there was a response, it just was different. It just wasn't verbal. If I had said, turn to John 9, verse 2, almost to a person. John 9, verse 2, so they're responding, right? Or even the silence or the looks were responding. I remember having lunch with a good friend of mine, and I asked him straight up, because we were close. I said, man, you just look like you are bored. He said, Tim, you gotta understand, I'm a military man. And I was taught that to show respect and reverence, you are silent and at attention. So when we're singing and you see me standing there, my heart is overflowing because I'm thinking about, God, I'm thinking about what's going on, right? This is me. So it caused me to say, well, maybe there are responses or a kind of response that I'm missing in the moment. And so maybe then that conversation happens after. And so you need the meaningful email after the moment to also shape the message. What I argue is that the community is involved in, my book is about preaching, but I would say speechmaking too, before, during, and after, right? So that there is a part to play for the community before the speech happens, while it's happening, and in that kind of post-reflective moment. That actual email, as someone who speaks a lot, I get a lot of emails post-reflection. Sometimes it's oh, that was amazing, I love you. Sometimes that was horrible, you shouldn't have said that. But when it's an engaged, I thought about that, you made me think about this, I disagree with this, right? Not because you're horrible, but here's what I lived with, and maybe you should think about it this way. That kind of response after is gonna shape the next word in ways that might even be more powerful than the amen or hallelujah in the moment, right? So there's room for the entirety of the community to respond and be a part of the speech as it goes out. That doesn't get you off the hook from saying amen and clap your hands.
I'd like to go back to the question that this young lady asked about AI.
I thought I could dodge it.
Where first thing I want to say is being a minister is a very, very important part of any community. I believe that entirely. My grandfather was a minister. That being said, this is 2026.
Yeah.
So we have to start looking and asking ourselves some different questions and get some different answers. The young lady said, what do we do about AI? The first and most important thing to do about AI is to go on Amazon and get an AI for Dummies book so we understand what we're talking about. It's not going anywhere. It will not go anywhere. So you need to be aware of what they're saying just as a basis. Just as a basis. And if you don't do that, you're going to have a problem. So there's another thing you can do. You want to know what's good and what's bad. When you're watching TV and they say in the left-hand corner, synthetic content, you can bet your bottom dollar, it was AI. Okay? That's where right there. Now, all of us are busy. We're taking care of family, we're taking care of kids, we're taking care of grandkids. So we don't have time to read the Wall Street Journal or a local newspaper. We don't have time for that. However, that's been by design, that you don't have time. That's by design. You gotta work. The man makes sure you work. Slavery isn't gone, it's still here. Every time you have to pay that credit card bill, that's a form of slavery, because you gotta get up and work. Now, there's a newspaper called Ground News. And one of the things about Ground News is that it tells you who is making the comments, who owns the newspaper. It tells you who's left, who's right, and who's center. So maybe 5 minutes a day, look at Ground News. Because chances are, a lot of us don't know who owns the Washington Post. And if you do know, You just spent $1 billion doing X, Y, and Z. Was that in your benefit? So to be able to answer the questions and look at them, you need to spend time evaluating what you're reading, and if you're not reading, try to find some time to read more.
So there are two quick things about, amen. There are two things about AI that I would echo real quick, and one, this comes up in the academy so much. Shout out to my sister Charlene, who's here from BU School of Theology. Amen. One is it's the sort of ecological concerns that are related to it, right? On one level, yes, it's here. I agree, it's here. You got to know it. But also, there's a kind of prophetic witness against contributing to its proliferation simply because, right? When communities of color are those that are facing the ecological concerns the most already, right? What's happening in Memphis and other places, right? Because of the amount of water that's necessary, amount of energy that's necessary. So we do have to think about the way that it's affecting our world plainly. A second thing becomes the notion of like generative AI, right? So there's such a difference between using AI as a way to like correlate information, as a way to produce reports from things that you put together, et cetera, and from AI, like just simply producing things. And like we have to think about the ethics behind that. You could go, and particularly after today, you took any notes from the day. You took, or like a minute transcript from what I said earlier. You could go into a program this afternoon and say, give me an opening statement for Black Tea Talk about oratory in the voice of Martin Luther King that's going to last 5 minutes, return. And it would spit something out in about 15 seconds, if that long. That depending on the eye, and depending on the ear, and depending on the performance, would sound like a thing. So then the question becomes, is that okay? Are we okay with that? Are we not? Where is it pulling from? I mean, like most things on the internet, the resources are biased in the first place, right? So what is produced is not some pure, conglomeration of all the knowledge out there. It's based on what it's pulling from, and odds are that knowledge and that information set is not going to be the best set possible, right? So we have to. All those things are a part of the conversation, but also don't think there's too foreign from history, right? There are historical antecedents to these questions about AI, at least as it pertains to things being generative, as it relates to people using other people's work, right? And other people's words. That's been going on as long as words have been said or written down, right? So there are some pathways to help us think about it more fully. But it absolutely, I believe, brother is absolutely right. It absolutely requires continued work, continued effort, continued knowledge, bit by bit, to fight the elephant and to try to wrap our heads around it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When I was a boy, growing up, the minister of my church was in Deerfield, Illinois, and he led the effort to integrate Deerfield, which was eventually successful. But as a boy, he took me on civil rights marches to Milwaukee with Father Rappi for fair housing. And when you look at those times, the fronts of the lines of the civil rights marches were filled with white ministers. Where are they today? And why aren't they leading the effort behind the folks who are leading them?
Sure. So I mean, some of this is always context. Are there multi-ethnic, interreligious, even faith-based actions and things going on around the country? Absolutely. I mean, even as I think about what's going on in Minneapolis in particular right now, there certainly is a kind of multi multi-ethnic coalition that is coalescing and that has existed and exists other places, we can name it. But I think, I don't want to put anything into your question, but I think to me, what has to be named in that question, it relates actually to one of, at least Frederick Douglass's speeches here in New Hampshire, is when he was talking about the religion of the time and the way that it affirmed the injustices that exist. And I think it's impossible to have a conversation about speech-making or even related to religion and politics now and not talk about the ways that white Christian nationalism is dominating the sphere and is sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the conversation, especially as it relates to religion and politics, right? There's this notion of what it means to be Christian and to exist, and a lot of that language is being co-opted by the empire, right? History teaches you, with Christianity in particular, but really so many of our religions, but absolutely with Christianity, that the moment Christian faith gets embedded with the empire, like danger happens, right? Lives are lost, quote, in the name of Jesus, right? This is what happened, and this is what has been happening. And there's a kind of a brandishing of boldness now that we haven't seen even in my lifetime. And we have folk who can walk, I shouldn't say it like that. We have folk who now can say things that are so blatantly racist in Christian name and still exist and have a following. At least for a time, right, where there's this kind of notion of shame, and there was some stuff that was said, and there was always being said, but it wasn't said out loud, and certainly wasn't being broadcast in this kind of national way. Now you have figures who can say, right, that 95% of the black church is heretical, and black people need to go find good white churches and white pastors so they can get some good religion. Right, this is something I can pull up, and it's like today that there are folk, and that still exists, and that's not the biggest outrage, and that church is not closed. I mean, these things exist in ways, and it is no question, it is tied to the ways that language and speech making is working through its current administration, right? And I don't understand, right, the ways that there are certain claims that are made, and the way that someone that would say 2 Corinthians claims a kind of Christian identity in ways that don't die. So yes, there are lots of folk, lots of interracial coalitions, a lot of folk doing the work, absolutely, but there's also a powerful religious movement that is only sustaining and bolstering the injustices that exist as well. Right?
And money behind it.
And the money behind it. And there are most certainly black preachers that are succumb to that temptation as well. I can name names there as well. So my sister's point is, the problem is, I can tell you, I need to listen to myself, because I can tell you all the preachers in that category. You asked me for exemplary orators, but yeah, so that problem exists, and so I think that I think again the collective voices have to rise and push back against what's out there. Sure.
Shelley, I'm just going to ask a question real quick, and then I'll pass it on to you. So just 2 things are happening here that I just wanted to just ask a question following this whole Christian movement and the white Christian nationalism that's going on. A couple weeks ago, I think Bishop Rob made a speech.
Yes.
He's the Episcopal Church Bishop for the Archdiocese here in New Hampshire. And he said that perhaps the time for speaking is over, that it's time for action. And that, he said he told his bishops that they need to write their wills because their lives may be on the line, taking the time for action. And at the same time, we have a group of monks walking to DC in silence, right? Doing the action, but no words, right? Where do we see ourselves working in this word and action to create the change that we want?
I know time is drawing close. I'll try to answer briefly. Man, I personally would say I would sort of refuse to think about it in binary terms, right? So to think that there's one without the other. I recognize the rhetorical force of saying the time for speaking is over, but like he said, the time for speaking is over, right? So that you don't communicate that without the words communicated in the first place, right? So you need, I would say you need both. I also would say, to get to my sister's point earlier, one of the things that the Black speechmaking tradition can teach us is the tie between words and actions, right? I would say historically, right, there is a tie between word and action, right? There's an understanding that there is a sort of praxis that is related to, that is a practical nature that is related to the words that are shared as well. So I would say to tie, I would say, I might edit the word just a bit, so the time for empty language is over, right? The time for cliches and feel-goods and kumbayas is over.
Or just
right?
action.
Right.
Just action. Just words is over.
Right. Just words, right. Words and action, right? Or, you know, if it sound good, make you feel good. Not make people feel act, right? Don't make people feel good, make people act, right? That's where I would go with that. Absolutely.
Not such a heavy question. Where does the role of, let's say, music, rap, soul, R&B, you can call it Motown, gospel, where does that fit in to the tradition of African American oratory?
Excellent question. On so many places, right? So even going back to I Have a Dream example, right? It was Mahalia Jackson, right? You know, said to tell him about the dream. But part of the reason she knew to even say that is because of the tie between her singing and Dr. King preaching that had existed in churches and communities over time, right? So there's been this sort of link between the two. And music has always been the kind of energy and animation of both movements and of Black speech. And so I would say in terms of, we've talked a lot about the community and the sort of congregation by extension today. And so I would say both in terms of making sure that the audience and congregation is ready to receive the word, right? Music has a major part to do that, but also in the performance of it, the kind of the rhythm of it. It is literally music, right? And literally that kind of sing-song, back and forth, rhythmic thought in ways that we think about our breath and how it goes and how it rises and up and down and back. That is music and is related as well. And I'm always excited about the ways that continues to evolve and the way that our movement songs now sound a little different and move a little different. But, you know, we shall overcome and we gonna be all right. Our Kendrick Lamar's are in the same trajectory of songs that come from the people that say this is how we're going to get through and this is how we're going to press on. So I think music is integral both to the performance itself and to the preparation for the community, and it shouldn't be thought of in separate ways. Yeah, absolutely. Wait,
Yeah.
Sean began is very much. I mean, it's very much. I would think about that in a song. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I had earlier you talked about pep rallies and the power of energizing people and getting them motivated to take action. And I'm thinking about the efforts today of getting out on the street and doing a protest. And in some ways it's like one big action, one big speech in a way. People are making statements when they're out there. And people are wondering nowadays, does it make any difference? It's freezing cold, we go out there, what's it doing? It definitely brings the community together. I've been to some of these and felt that kind of energy and that action, wanting to do more. I'm interested in how you see that in the context of making a difference, getting something to happen. And how do we take it so that people don't just go home and say it was cold, it was exciting, it was fun, great things I've heard and read, but what do I do now?
It's such an excellent question. I've been thinking about this a lot. So I think the challenge for us, when I say us here, I mean we who believe in freedom shall not rest until it comes, right? So the challenge for us now is in some ways the audience for our actions. So there was a time where we marched, we had speeches, we had rallies, because it was a way of garnering and sort of bringing attention and also trying to influence those that may be outside of the fight or neutral in a certain way. So let's bring attention to this so now you can no longer miss it, right? When I think one of our greatest prophets was Mamie Till, right? Emmett Till's mother who said, I'm gonna leave this casket open because y'all gonna see what they did to my son. So then that picture from the funeral gets broadcast across the nation. So now you have folk across the country who say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was that bad. Or if I had kidded, I kidded myself to think it wasn't that bad, now I can't hide from it anymore. 2026, the challenge is we live in echo chambers in ways that we've never lived before. AI makes us question whether or not what we see is real in the first place. And sadly, it's 2026, but I often feel like it's 1984 because we've reached a place where folks say they've reached, I'm going to misquote it, but I'll paraphrase, they want us in this great and final act to ignore the evidence of our eyes and ears, right? So then the question becomes, who is our audience now for action? What ways are we trying to gain and garner attention? And I think it's the specificity of our audience and the actions that we desire that requires a bit more thought collectively. So then our speeches and marches and rallies and things have a more pointed focus. You know, so and I was thinking about the difference between, I've been looking at the difference in the sermons and speeches around Bloody Sunday, which happened in Selma, and Hoodie Sunday, which folks may not remember, but when Trayvon Martin was killed, there were a lot of so many preachers that had Hoodie Sundays and sort of preach. And one of the sort of plainest distinction is that the preaching and speaking in and around Bloody Sunday was was organized proactively to fight for a specific thing, that is voting rights. Hoodie Sunday was a reaction to what had already happened. And so I think it served an incredibly important pastoral import in terms of like speaking to the trauma of a nation and the people. And in some ways it raised awareness, but it wasn't as much tied to, and we want this bill passed, right? And we want this particular thing to change. And so, there was action, but there wasn't a kind of process attached to that action. And so this is a word for sort of constant organizing. This is why it pays to be organized, and to stay ready, so you have to get ready. So that when something happens, you already have the organization in place to take advantage of the moment instead of a moment happening, and now we got to get people together and try to make something happen. But you're already ready. This thing has happened. All right, we're going to leverage this and use it. But even when you leverage it and use it, the question becomes, to whom? And maybe some would say, that the audience shifts towards some other folk who may have some power, may have some votes, and may have some influence, right? Maybe there are folk that aren't voting right now. Maybe there are some folk that aren't involved, that are on the sidelines for whatever reason. But I think serious thought has to be given to that. So the second part, and I think that guides and can guide the first part.
This will be our last question. It's going to come from over.
We see, people, kids, students walking out of school, doing ICE protests, speaking out, against this administration and what's going on in this world. What would be your advice to kids who ask the older generation on what is happening or what advice they would take? So like if someone was to ask someone like you or the people in this room, what's happening? Can you explain this to me? What would be your advice for those mentors and what to say that is proactive and that has a good message?
It's an excellent question. If you were to ask me specifically, what I would say is you should listen to your father. Make sure you take care of him, and that's my oldest daughter, Sophia. Son Ezekiel or the daughter is but I'm not gonna call you by your pet name. I won't do that. Sophia, you asked a great question. Hey, that's a really good question. And so my encouragement would be to say is don't lose or miss your agency in what's going on. In some ways, I would say don't turn to me and ask what to do. You figure out what you think you should do. And then lean on those of us that are a little bit more experienced for some wisdom, for some resources, right, as sounding boards, but to do what you feel is necessary. I mean, we forget, particularly as we glamorize and think about the civil rights movement and such nostalgia, we forget about how young they were, right? We think about, man, when King died in the mid-30s, right? So we forget how young folk were, and not even just sort of young college age, but there were kids, like literal kids, on the front line of some of these marches getting hit by, getting hit by, hoses and things, right? So my pushback, not even pushback, but my encouragement would be to say, you think about it, you organize your kids, your friends, and your community. Think about what impact you would make. I would also say, in a world that is so attached via social media and otherwise, I think that there is less import given to local actions, right? And it's almost as if it doesn't go viral, then it's not important, right? And it's not powerful. But those that have done any organizing will tell you that all politics are local, right? And if you really want to see change, it's got to start from the floor, from the bottom, from where you are. So start where you are, and continue to build and organize.
Thank you very much, and give yourselves a hand.
Absolutely. Don't give Dr. Dottie a round of applause.
And I hope those people who are online are giving themselves a hand as well. So thank you very much, and I think we're about to have the benediction, huh?
Yes, we are. Not for me, but I'm just going to remind everyone, you were given a feedback card. If you could just fill that out before you leave, you can just leave it on your chair, we'll collect it, but this is going to be very helpful with helping us fund more tea talks like this, help us get some information to help deliver a really positive program. So I'm going to kick it over to April, and she will close us out.
All right, so what I'm going to say is, what time is it? And you're going to say it's tea time. So what time is it? Tea time. What time is it? Tea time. What time is it? Tea time. All right, as we close this conversation, I want to just pause the engine just to honor what has moved through this room today. The legacy of African American speech making reminds us that voice has never been a luxury. It's been a necessity, a strategy for survival, a declaration of humanity in moments when humanity was denied. The legacy is not just something we study, it is something we inherit. And today we are living in times that once again test our willingness to speak. Silence may feel safer. Shrinking may feel easier. But history shows us that progress has never been moved by quiet compliance.
Yes. Yes.
It has always been carried forward by voices willing to be heard. Your voice matters. Each and every person in this room. Using your voice does not require perfection. It requires presence.
Yes.
It requires courage. It requires the belief that what you carry, your perspective, your experience, your conviction, has value. So as you leave here today, I invite you to carry this legacy forward. Speak with intention, listen with care, and when the moment calls for it, do not retreat from your voice. Because a more perfect union is not built only by history. It is shaped by those who choose again and again to speak. Our next Tea Talk is February 8th. Mark your calendars. February 8th at 4 p.m. at Temple Israel. A Knock at Midnight Black Preacher as Orator, featuring the Reverend Robert Thompson, Angel Simone, and Bishop Michael Curry. At this time, we would like to thank our presenters, the opening poet, Sean Caliber, the Reverend Dr. Timothy Levi Adkins-Jones, Dr. Dottie Morris, today's volunteers, Yurshu, Pat Savage, Linda Cunningham, Nancy Hotchkiss, Valerie Sousa, Brad Randolph, Dan Conley. Thank you so much for your volunteerism today. And last but certainly not least, our sponsors for today: Episcopal Church of New Hampshire, Winthrop Douglas Hospital, Shishan Finney, St. John's Church, Shaheen and Gordon St. George's Church. Doesn't have to be perfect, y'all, okay? New Hampshire Center for Justice and Equity, Melanie Levesque. All right. Thank you so much for your sponsorship today and for taking the time to come out to see us. We'll see you for the next tea time. What time is it? Tea time. Thank you very much.